Okay, I finally get to record this video. Not sure maybe when it's going to go up. There's other videos that I'm working on. I've been kind of busy trying to get everything edited. Got other stuff to do. But this is one I've been wanting to do for a while. I don't know exactly how to describe the topic. But I'll probably, depending on what I title it, the title of the video will probably be a decent explanation as to what it's going to be about. But just to give a basic overview before I share my screen and go through a couple sources, things that I wanted to show, it basically has to do with issues on the development of what you call materialism, or some might say scientific socialism, historical materialism, dialectical materialism, as it developed from Marx on. And there were some fundamental errors. I mean, I don't know if I should give like a trigger warning or something for this video, but I feel like these are pretty egregious philosophical errors that was made, or I guess that were made, starting with, I can't say starting with Marx, but necessary somewhere around that time, and then moving forward. As you'll see as I go through this, I feel these are like fundamental errors that kind of got picked up through Marxism and now kind of like are fundamental to Marxism. And obviously, leftist ideas that are influenced by Marx or Marxism will pick these up just kind of automatically. So let me go ahead and go to the screen really quickly. And I want to bring up a couple of tabs. The first is going to be a video. This is a very popular video. Or I guess it should be Zizek explaining ideology through the they live. And basically what we have here is a video, They Live, from a pervert's guide to ideology. And he explains specifically how ideology functions, and some confusion with regard to the analogy or the metaphor from the They Live glasses. So I'm going to go into this.
Giving you a choice.
Sorry about that. I'll probably edit this part of the video, but I had to adjust this so I could hear the sound, so I could see what part is coming, because I was recording the sound, but it wasn't, I couldn't hear it through my headphones. So let me go hit this again. We'll start at the beginning of the video, then I'm going to fast forward to the specific part where he has the glasses, because I don't think all of it needs to be explained. I'll just explain the beginning part, and then I'll go through to the part about the glasses.
I'm giving you a choice. Either put on these glasses or start eating that trash can.
I already am eating from the trash can all the time. The name of this trash can is ideology. The material force of ideology makes me not see what I'm effectively eating. It's not only our reality which enslaves us. The tragedy of our predicament when we are within ideology is that when we think that we escape it into our dreams, at that point we are within ideology.
Okay, so this first very important point about ideology basically is with regard to when you think you escape ideology, being the deepest within ideology. And the first part about eating from the trash can, put on the glasses.
Either put on these glasses or start eating that trash can.
I already am eating from the trash can all the time. The name of this trash can is ideology.
Okay, the trash can is ideology. Basically, it can be complicated to understand exactly what he's talking about, but because it's a very simplified, profound point basically. So what he's saying, okay, the analogy is being made with the glasses. I guess when he explains the glasses, it makes more sense. But the analogy, this kind of, or whatever you want to say, metaphor that they're trying to make here, is that he wants them to put on the glasses, basically. So he wants them to accept a particular ideological framework, or not accept but reject the particular ideological framework that he has in order to see, basically, through the glasses. And the guy is rejecting it. This is similar, I guess, to the phenomena. I guess someone describes it as like cognitive dissonance. But I guess through like a psychoanalytic framework, you would describe it more as like ego defense mechanisms. Like people have certain defense mechanisms that make them reject. Obviously, they get in a fight later on in the scene over him putting on the glasses. And what humans experience when their ideologies are challenged, when ideologies challenged in general, is extreme anxiety and a rejection of particular ideas. That's why you have things like confirmation bias and stuff like that, where people will actively seek validation of their particular ideological views and interpret the world through the ideological views. And that's why basically saying, you're eating from the trash can of it. You're eating from the trash can of ideology, because people are always stuck within ideology, specifically. And there was a comment that I noticed about. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if I could find it. About maybe potentially the hypocrisy. Okay, there we go. So Zizek acts as though he escaped ideology itself and put on the glasses that lets him see what's really going on, when he said before, you think you escaped ideology when you're the most enveloped in it. I guess they explain the problem with that. I think they explain the problem with it. Not quite right. Her whole point is when he pretended it's ideological, at least escaped ideology pretending. But the point here to be made is that it's not that Zizek through the analogy of the glasses that you escape ideology. It's the critique of ideology. And they made a point here about the Soviet Union. I think it was about the Soviet Union being, the Soviet states forced ideology on the population. But you have to understand that there's a difference between the ideology and critique of ideology. And I guess the point to be made is that the critique of ideology itself is rooted in fundamental philosophical points, where, and this is the point I want to get to, like as the video goes along, it's fundamental philosophical points that are made kind of at kind of the core first philosophy, ontological, metaphysical level of philosophy, that hold together like a critique of ideology, versus people who have developed ideas in like their various moments. Because obviously the Soviet Union had a materialist framework that they were trying to impose. But I mean, in general, you're never going to escape the trying to impose ideology. That's the point. The point is you don't escape ideology. Your whole framework is around building ideology. And some people, the more people are blind to that, is the more you're in ideology. Is the point. The more people are blind to the fact that you're always stuck in ideology, because at that point, you're ignoring your own ideology and you're not critiquing the ideology that you have. That's the point, basically. So you're always stuck in ideology, and you can't escape it. If you assume you escaped it, then you have to be the most deep in it, because you're not even acknowledging the fact that you have an ideological framework. But it's clear that every group of people have ideological frameworks. If you look at like, Democrats and Republicans, like you could have the exact same event happen, and like the exact same real event happen, say January 6th or, COVID vaccinations. And depending on someone's ideological framework or wearing masks, the Trump, like the election, what depending on someone's ideological framework, they could have a completely different interpretation of reality. You could have the same with maybe someone who's a like a feminist and views reality through a lens of patriarchy, could have a completely different experience based on how they articulate uh articulate their conditions and their understanding of the world based on that as their ideological framework, which they use to interpret everything through that. But the point to be made with regard going back is the point when he actually explains what the glasses represent and how people get confused, and that is the confusion that lays at the core of what I feel the problem became with Marxism and socialism, as it post-Marx, how it got to be understood. So I think it's right here, but if it's not, I can always back up.
You see dictatorship in democracy. It's the invisible order which sustains your apparent freedom. The explanation for the existence of this strange ideology glasses is the standard story of the invasion of the body.
What?
Common sense. We think that ideology is something blurry.
Either pay for it or put it back. You're gonna
Be under the control of aliens.
look, no house today. Put it back.
According to our common sense, we think that ideology is something blurring, confusing our straight view. Ideology should be glasses which distort our view. And the critique of ideology should be the opposite, like you take off the glasses so that you can finally see the way things really are. This precisely, and here the pessimism of the film, of They Live, is well justified. This precisely is the ultimate illusion. Ideology is not simply imposed on ourselves. Ideology is our spontaneous relationship to our social world, how we perceive its meaning, and so on and so on. We, in a way, enjoy our ideology.
All right.
To step out of ideology, it hurts. It's a painful experience. You must force yourself to do it. This is rendered in a wonderful way with a further scene in the film where John Nada tries to force his best friend, John Armitage, to also put the glasses on.
Okay. So to me, stuff like this is like absolutely brilliant. I don't really know how other people interpret it, but I mean that point is the point that I'm going to be trying to make. People think that ideology is like, he said, like, something blurring your vision, like glasses. Think of it like maybe a particular type of, think like maybe like drunk goggles. I don't know if anybody ever put drunk goggles that they give you in like school, like maybe like DARE programs or something, like you do something that impairs your vision. Like this is what it's like to be impaired. It blurs your vision and stuff like that. And to see clearly, you take off the ideology, you take off and you take the ideology away, and view the objective world, and you view everything objectively, and you view the facts. But like I said, obviously, if you take two different people, if you take a Democrat and a Republican, neither one of these people are going to say that they don't view the world objectively, or they don't view the world according to facts. Both of them think that they're viewing the world objectively and according to facts. But they have certain ideological presuppositions which they use to interpret the world, right? And that's the point Zizek's trying to make here, is that people think, and this is the common sense, this is the very common sense, this is what most people think, is that, that is what needs to be taken away. But the really core point here is that no, like the movie suggests, ideology is our spontaneous way of understanding the world. That is how ideology basically is like the worldview, or like interpretive framework, the reality we construct for ourselves to be able to gain understanding. That's why the ultimate, one of the ultimate ideological, frameworks is religion. Where you don't understand anything, things get attributed to God, things you can't understand, sometimes. Um, Religious frameworks that, explain certain phenomena, or try to teach histories through like small allegories and stories, that are simplified, for people who don't have complex scientific understandings, to use these small stories to explain deeply. Or I mean, like this, like, in a sense, to explain. But but the ideological framework that gets built around it in order to explain the world. And as mentioned, with the violent struggle, when you challenge that, you're breaking down someone's entire framework with which they understand the world. You can't just say, give up your ideology. It is a violent process, because the anxiety created with the lack of understanding and the unknown, uh, uh, and inability to articulate your conditions and experiences and everything going on in the world is a painful process, and it takes, you know a certain mastery, a certain dedication to step outside of, to gain new knowledge from different perspectives, to have your ideas challenged that could potentially fall apart, and you realize that your understanding of the world could possibly be broken up. Um, that's why you have some people go their entire lives and basically just be in one, bubble of an ideological perspective. Or you'll see major events in people's lives be the reason why they do have to change their ideological perspective, because it's from a major event where basically couldn't hold their ideological framework together. And he mentions that what the real critique of ideology really is like putting on the glasses. It is a, like, developing a framework for understanding the world. The framework itself is a critique of ideology. Mastering the framework itself at a fundamental level is the critique of the critique of ideology. Because you can't get rid of ideology. It is the spontaneous way which you understand the world. And like I said, like you mentioned before, when you think you get rid of it, that's why you're most deeply in it. And I want to try to use this framework to for people to be able to understand what happened with Marx. And we're going to start, obviously, if the video is going to be on materialism, we have to start with we're going to start with Hegel, the philosophy off which is based, and we're going to start with idealism. So I'm just going to go to Hegel's explanation of idealism. I mean, it might not be the best. It's just what I would have as available as a source. So let me go ahead and search it up, and then I'll bring up the screen. This is from, and I'll show you what the source is. This is from Marxist.com, but I'm obviously they're not might not be able to see it here, so I'm gonna share the whole screen. Okay, and then I'm gonna zoom in. Okay, so this is from Science of Logic, Volume 1, Objective Logic, Book 1, Doctrine of Being. This is Section 1 on determinist equality. And we're going to go down. And it's a remark, a second remark. The first remark is a different page, but it's a second remark on idealism. This would be paragraph, it looks like 316. And okay. The proposition that the finite is ideal constitutes idealism. Okay. So what does this mean for people who don't know what he's talking about here? Okay. The infinite, obviously, just think of the infinite. I'm going to try to give simplified explanations, which might not be totally accurate, but potentially could help people conceptualize it better. So think of the infinite as the entire universe. Just imagine if you thought the entire universe was just one thing. You didn't differentiate between anything in the universe. It's everything together, all the universe, everything, the world, whatever you constitute as everything that exists, consider it infinite. It's infinite. And finite, consider things that are like specific, particular things. like broken down, quantized within that universe into a finite ideal, which he's saying here, the finite is ideal. Okay. And it says the idealism of philosophy consists of nothing else than in recognizing that the finite has no veritable being. Okay. So by that he means that the finite, there's no veritable being to the finite. Every philosophy is essentially an idealism, or at least has idealism for its principle. Basically, in general, you recognize this. Philosophy or philosophers, as Hegel would see it, as I would see it, or I think the correct way to see it is people who dealt with idealism. Idealism is basically fundamental to all philosophy. And the realist philosophers that exist are what I would consider pop philosophers who were just kind of engaging with particular ideas, but not very good at it, basically. But every philosophy is essentially an idealism, or at least has idealism for its principle. And the question then is only how far its principle is actually carried out. Okay. As this is true of philosophy as of religion. For religion equally does not recognize finitude as veritable being, as something ultimate and absolute, or as something underived, uncreated, or eternal, right? So like, God is the everything in religion. And then obviously the finitude has no veritable being, but it's all derived from God. So consequently, the opposition of idealistic to realistic philosophy has no significance, right? And this isn't in the sense, I'm assuming that he means not in the sense that it has no significance from understanding, like to be able to contrast, like, realistic philosophers, because obviously he does, like, I wouldn't consider them to be like real philosophers or doing real philosophy sometimes. So insofar as, like he says, is this not ideal? It doesn't have idealism, essentially idealism for its principle, right? So not in that sense, but in the sense that and this is very important for like understanding the slip up that happens with the Marxism, because consequently the opposition of idealism and philosophy has no significance. So if there's no significance between this opposition and Hegel, as you're reading right here, is what he's saying. This consequently opposition has no significance. Then what significance would Marx have to then, or Engels or whomever else that comes after? What why would they then go back to materialism? And it's not as if materialism can't be understood, and then in that sense be the same thing as idealism. You understand? If you don't understand it, it's not like you could just say, well, instead of using the term idealism for the same thing, I want to use the term materialism just to be, whatever, but it's still idealism. It's the same thing. But idealism obviously makes more sense than using materialism, like from, I guess, a language standpoint. But okay. So a philosophy which ascribed veritable ultimate absolute being to a finite existence as such would not deserve the name of philosophy, which I already mentioned that. The principle of ancient or modern philosophies, water, matter, atoms, or thoughts, are thoughts, universals, ideal entities, not things that are as they immediately present themselves to us, that is, in their sensuous individuality. I think that's plain English, and clear on what he means, so I don't think I need to explain that. I hope not. Not even the water of Thales, for although this is also empirical water, is at the same time also the in itself or essence of all other things too, and those other things are not self-subsistent or grounded in themselves. They are posited by or derived from and other from water. That is, they are ideal entities. I don't think I need to explain this either, but maybe for people who aren't familiar with Hegel, like the differentiation that happens, like, so if you start out with the universe and then you start differentiating the things in the universe, you differentiate according to something else. So the like logical progression is not like A equals A in this type of in this so like if you know like the formula, like everything is that thing and nothing else, or something like that, A equals A. In this type of philosophy, we're talking about A equals not A equals not A equals A equals not A, and a constant. That's how, you know, it works in people's brains generally. So that's how they describe it in the philosophy. So it's A equals not A. So in the sense that you understand the object by its differentiation from everything else. So think, when you're describing something, what is something, you have to describe it in terms so that it can't be confused with something else. So you come up with counterexamples and all the rest philosophically to be able to say, well, this is, you know, an apple. You can't just say it's a particular round object, etc., because, you know, you could say, can't confuse it with a ball, for example. So you have to be able to differentiate, and the principle of differentiating from everything else is what constitutes the philosophy. So I want to pause this for a minute, and then I want to restart. Okay. So I'm gonna have to edit that again. I have no clue why someone decided to get the wrong number in the middle, like 9:30 you know, at night, but whatever. So let me go back to this. I don't know what the hell that was about. But here we go. Um okay, so we're at the entities part. Okay. Now above now above we have named the principle of the universal ideal, and still more must the notion, idea, spirit also be named. These are Hegelian concepts. The notion, idea, spirit. I don't know if I really need to explain these, but I hope not. Well, I guess if I did have to explain, I have to explain them in another, like something else, because that's, you know, kind of a different subject of Hegelian philosophy and not like really as relevant to this. So I'll move forward. Again, and then again, we have described individual sensuous things as ideal in principle or in their notion, still more in spirit, that is, as sublated. So I guess for a brief explanation of what he means, like when he says that sublated, like, you know, within like the notion. So you have like the two aspects of whatever it is, and then, you know, they get sublated together. Okay. In the notion. So I guess like within that principle of like the A not A, then what is sublated would be the not A. I guess some people would use like the phrase negation of the negation, and then the sublation would be then taken up as a complete A object of one object again, I guess. You know, but obviously there's still moments, and there's different ways of, like, you know, just depending on how the like concept or whatever you're talking about is, like, however it works. So okay, that is a sublated. Here we must note in passing this twofold aspect. That's what I mentioned, like the size twofold aspect, which showed itself in connection with the infinite, namely that the one hand the ideal is concrete, veritable being. On the other hand, the moments of this concrete being are no less ideal, are sublated in it, but in fact, what is only the one concrete whole from which the moments are inseparable. Like I said, that's basically just what I just explained. So I explained it, and he basically explained it anyway. So okay. So I don't know if the second paragraph actually, when I read through it, I don't know if anything was actually in this that needed to be explained or that had anything to do with, you know, the point I was going to make in this video. But I'll just go ahead and go through it real quick because it's the paragraph. So by the ideal, and this is supposed to be different in German, I guess, is meant chiefly the form of figurate conception and imagination. and what is simply in my conception or a notion or idea or an imagination, and so on is called ideal, so that even fantasies that occurred or that are counted as ideal conceptions which are not only distinct from the real world but are supposed to be essentially not real. In point of fact, the spirit is the idealist proper, and spirit, even as feeling, imagination, is still more as thinking and comprehending. The content is not present as so called real existence. In the simplicity of the ego, such external being, in the simplicity of the ego, such external being is present only as sublated. It is for me. It is ideally in me. The subject of idealism, either in the form of unconscious idealism or conscious generally, or consciously enunciated and set up as a principle, concerns only the form of conception according to which a content is mine. In this systematic idealism of subjectivity and form, subjectivity, this form is declared to be the only true exclusive form in opposition to the form of objectivity or reality of the external existence of that content. Such idealism is merely formal because it disregards the content of imagination or thought, which content is being imagined or thought can remain wholly in its finitude. And such an idealism, nothing is lost, just as much because the reality of such finite content, the existence, as much because the reality of such a finite content, the existence filled with the finitude is preserved, as because insofar as abstraction is made from the finite reality, the content is supposed to be of consequence in itself, and in it nothing is gained for the same reason as nothing is lost, because the ego conception spirit remains filled with the same content of finitude. The opposition of the form of subjectivity and objectivity is of course one of the finitudes, but the content as taken up in sensation, intuition, or even in the more abstract elements of perception of thought contains finitudes in abundance, with the exclusion of one of the modes of finitude, namely of said form of subjectivity and objective, or I guess a form of subjective and objective. These finitudes are certainly not eliminated. Still, that's how supposedly spontaneously fallen away. Okay, so we got Hegel's what idealism means. So now we're going to go to Marx and Engels, and we're going to go through a couple of sources of what ends up happening. So I guess I could just go. I guess I might be done with this, but I might need to come back to something else. So let me go ahead and go to. I want to have this Wikipedia page here. This is mainly going to be here because if I have trouble with timeline, because I mean, I'm going to be honest, I haven't memorized all of Marx's life, but there are certain like timeline elements, like I might forget, like, you know, when he graduated college, or when he died, or when he wrote the manifesto, or when he started writing Capital. If I have a problem with a date or something, I can come back to the Wikipedia page just to get like a date, or or something, information about his health or something like that. So okay, this is Lenin. Can we go to Lenin? Yeah, I guess that's the Lenin does connect to the Hegel's Science of Logic, because Lenin actually did read and take notes on conceptions of science on the Science of Logic, and this is book 1, Doctrine of Being, which you're just reading from. And you could see in the, I guess that's why I need to come back. You could see, if you look through this, if you read this on Marxist.com, which I did, you see where it's highlighted. That would be where Lenin might have highlighted, and you see where it has like this R. This if you read this, you could click on that to get Lenin's like notes, annotations. You can see it up here. Highlighted text is Lenin's underlining, and the R is his annotations. So if you ever want to read the Science of Logic and like kind of like see what Lenin might have been, you know, highlighting, or, you know, thinking about when he was going through it, you could do that. I think I did that for a minute when I first read it. And then I was kind of like he kind of really doesn't know what he's talking about, you know, sometimes what he's highlighting. So I just kind of like, after a while, I was like, whatever. But let me see. He does mention, like, I don't think he highlighted the part about the idealism, or he might have highlighted it, but he didn't write a note on it. So it was highlighted, but he didn't note what the actually no, he doesn't even highlight. But then again, he depending on what version he was reading when he was highlighting and what the remarks were there or whatever, not there or whatever, he might not have included that, or maybe he just read it but didn't really pay much attention to it. I don't know. I can't really say exactly specifically why he might not have picked up on this section that I felt was important when the explanation of what idealism was. Um, I guess I don't know if that has significance or not, to be honest. But let me see. This is very important. Where he says logic is pure science, that is pure knowledge, a whole extent, in the whole extent of its development. He says first line nonsense, the second line brilliant. What? Oh my goodness. Let me find a part that I was looking for. Okay, this is the part. So this gives you an idea of the fact that, and this is what a lot of people would do. I think there was a scene. I'm not gonna be able to get the scene. It's from a movie anyway. I don't know if they actually let me. Well, I could probably show it, but it doesn't matter. My channel is demonetized. I was thinking about showing it. I'll see if I can find it, and now I can add it in. I can edit the video to add it in if I can't find it like super fast. But there's a scene at the beginning of I think the movie's called Frida. Uh, yeah, it is Frida. What am I saying? I think it's called. But yeah, they talk about like if you read Marx, because he was a Marxist, and like, have you read Marx or have you read Hegel? And they get in an argument because he said you read Marx before you read Hegel, and now you interpret everything that Hegel did politically or something like that. So we'll see if I find that, because that's what this reminds me of. Let me see. How you spell Frida? Fri. I think that's the opening scene, to be honest. But yeah, I think this is it. So let me go and show it real quick.
Frida!
How much is the calata?
Frida, come on!
The bus!
We'll take the next
No,
one.
no, no, come.
Watch out. Hey.
Now I'm hoping this is the part, because I went through that much editing. I'm hoping the hell this is the motherfucking part where they talk about this thing. Wasn't before that.
Anyway, I just don't think he's completely apolitical, that's all.
But that's because you read it after you read Marx. You always read things in the wrong order.
That's ridiculous. Why should it matter what order you read it in?
Because if you have already read Marx, then of course Hegel is gonna seem political. But the truth is the idea of history as a dialectic just predicts Marx, which is not the same as affirming him specifically.
For the ceiling of the opera house.
But I mean, that's always going to be what that reminds. What it kind of reminds me of, because he's like, well, why does it matter what order you read it in? But as you can see, what Lenin says here, responding to this, he says, let me go ahead and get this to screen. Get to this one. Okay, so you see what he says here. Nonsense about the absolute, which I'm not going to go back to even see what he was commenting on, but I am generally trying to read Hegel materialistically. Hegel is materialism which has been stood on its head according to Engels. That is to say, I cast this aside for the most part God, the absolute, pure idea, etc. So regardless of what he was talking about, because it's a movie scene, so obviously they're not They just wanted to have him say something that kind of sounded intelligent. Probably they probably didn't bring in like a Hegelian expert or an freaking Marxist to say what specifically would make sense to say in this predicament or whatever. They probably just had him just say a line that sounded cool or it sounded close enough. But like in general, if you read Marx first, like what do you like when you go back and read Hegel? You're going to read it like look. He says specifically read it through a materialistic lens. The point of the movie scene was about reading it politically, which that didn't make much sense because obviously everything's political in a sense. So and obviously he wrote Philosophy of Right, which is political. So I mean, whatever on that. But if you read Hegel second and you read Hegel materialistically, you basically said you're automatically presuming that the idealism is wrong and it's stood on the head. You're assuming that makes sense. And I don't even know why they're quoting Engels and says according to Engels. What is this? Okay, the Warfare book and the end of classic German philosophy from 1950. I think I actually have this pulled up too already on Hegel. I don't know what line did it say it was at? Page 37. Okay, that's from, I don't know if they have the page numbers on here. No. But this is from Engels, which is I'm going to point that I'm going to get to later. And this is who he was getting the idea from. But also this stood on its head thing was later in Marx. What year was this? What year did it say it was? Okay, published in 86. So that would have been after. That's why I said I might need to check this because I'm pretty sure that's after Marx passed away. Yes, it was. So that's kind of important that came from. What did it say on there? But yeah, that's kind of important that it said that Engels. Okay, that says 1950. I thought it said 1858 for a second. I was like, what the heck? That didn't make sense. But yeah, so that was after Marx passed away. But obviously Marx mentioned it's something similar to that. But regardless, yeah, of him trying to read Hegel materialistically, that's, I guess, absolutely crazy. I mean, it makes sense. And this is a point to me made too, is it makes sense. I cast aside for the most part God. I don't know why the absolute or pure idea that doesn't make much sense really at all. Why he cast that aside, but I understand the part about cast aside God because a lot of the post Hegelians were atheists, so that kind of was a point in their materialism. Like the materialism, like one of the points, kind of as to why they might have adopted that would be because of the atheism. So, and then another would probably just be pretentiousness. That would be like kind of two reasons that would lead you to the wanting to change from idealism to materialism without there actually being a difference between the two. But obviously, but what you're going to find, again, this is another important point. What you're going to find is that for the most part, Marx tried to and realized he couldn't at a point take the rationalism out of the German tradition as seen, say, through Hegel. Take the rationalism, the dialectic out of the German like philosophical tradition and Hegelian philosophy and logic, or just logic. We'll just stick with logic. He was trying to take the Hegelian logic because people could get confused as to what dialectic actually means, which it means like through dialogue. It's like a technique of dialogue. It's like the posing and answering questions aspect of philosophy, like examples, counter examples, which represents the movement of the thing minus the difference, not the thing, and then bringing it back together and all the other stuff through the process. That's considered like dialectic going back to there's methods of dialectic, like techniques like such as like the Socratic method of, you know, just like interrogating and questioning, like through counterexamples to like kind of chip away like a negative aspects that are used in Plato. And then there's kind of like Hegel would be kind of maybe against that because he is more for like the positive aspects of building like the ideas philosophically themselves. And I guess you could technically consider like free association and what do they call it? Free association and suggestion and psychoanalysis and like the interpersonal like the communication and psychoanalysis as kind of like a type of dialectic as well. But as far as like the method of explaining that like in the logic that Marx utilized to write Capital, he thought he could take that out with also taking like English empiricism, which was connected with realism, and like he could kind of like just kind of shift it as materialism without taking the realist aspects of it, but you're dragging the realist aspects of it through like the materialism, and those are connected. So like the German philosophical tradition, like, you know, Locke versus or Newton versus Leibniz, Locke and Newton, I think both, or like a Descartes, which he wasn't German, but like he kind of had that, like he's from that like tradition, or Spinoza, but like versus like a Hobbes, or what would be another example? Kant versus Hume, or then Marx versus like Adam Smiths and stuff like that, out of the English type political economic tradition. Like in order to like challenge them in the same way through like the rationalism versus the imperialism, he could take the imperialism though, and but you're going to get the realism, and he thought he could take that and kind of, but what ended up happening was they kind of did adopt a lot of the realist elements, but he realized that that was kind of wrong really anyway. He realized that he kind of like opposed Hegel kind of unfairly and didn't really take into consideration how powerful what Hegel provided really was, and till later on. And I think by the time that point was, I mean, he was old, he was kind of sick, he didn't really want to fully admit that he was wrong, and eventually I think that's what ends up getting picked up because from Engel's work mostly, and then obviously Lenin, and you got Stalin, and you have Mao, and you have like the 21st century, or not 21st century, but 20th century thinkers that kind of automatically just presumed, like Lenin does here, presumed that the materialist aspect was the correct way of approach, and didn't really even consider Hegel or read Hegel only through this lens of that being like on its face correct way to interpret. And like this is from Thesis on Feuerbach. This is actually Marx. But you see, when he wrote this in 45, was like well a long time away from, you know, how his ideas progressed when he wrote Capital, which is the core work. I mean, we have to be honest. Was his like mega, like the work that everybody, you know, considers, and that's obviously, and this is famous because of Marx saying like the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it, which is, you know, absolutely kind of crazy. I mean, it's just like it's like a good quote, but like comparing it to what the philosophers actually did is like absolutely insane. Like philosophers' interpretation of the world didn't change it. Like that's just absolutely crazy because like moral philosophy and the impact on like the way people viewed like slavery, for example, like they had like no conception of moral philosophy, and arguments like all the arguments are coming from just religion without people thinking about like the morals of society and politics and everything like that. It's just like absolutely crazy. Or like I mean almost anything basically. Like the fact that Marx actually was influenced by the philosophy later on, and through an interpretation of the world. So it's kind of crazy to think about. He said philosophers only interpreted the world, and Marx is famous for an interpretation of the world through the lens of political economy and capital. It's just like absolutely crazy. He's known for an interpretation of the world, It's absolutely crazy. It's crazy. And but people go back to this. It's like what, and like this is kind of like the equivalent of this is basically like going back to someone like when they were a kid and something that they said that was kind of cool or hip or something. It just kind of like quotable when they were a child. The they just said it, and that but I mean it's like kind of crazy. But like he says here, the chief defect of all hitherto existing materialism that I fear back include, and this is the point. Like most of Marx's criticisms and stuff like that were aimed, as I said before, I already said this, but I want to say it one more time, aimed against other materialists. It was never aimed at idealist philosophy. I guess the only person you would even fall in it within that category could be Bruno Bauer. But from one perspective, you could consider him a materialist in the sense of the religious sense. But like most of it, like it was all aimed at materialists. But here it wasn't aimed at Hegel. Like none of it was aimed at all the young Hegelians. It was never aimed at Hegel except for the thing of the philosophy of right. And the first time I read that, like I don't want to go through it here because it's kind of long. But the first time I read that, like if you read the introduction to the philosophy of right or the preface or whatever of Hegel's, it's absolutely like brilliant. It's like one of the most brilliant things you'll ever read. And then for Marx like to try to like even approach that, I think the philosophy of right is probably underrated in terms of being one of the greatest like philosophical works ever. So it's very underrated. Like when I first read it, I was like, man, this is crazy. But then for Marx to think he could step on that level, like fresh out of like graduate school, and like could step on that level of philosophy is absolutely like it's insane. And for people to actually believe that he was is like insane. Because that was Hegel's mature work. I think it was his most mature work. So it's like crazy. It's absolutely insane. But to think he even understood that complex of ideas then, which I mean, I'm not saying he didn't have the capacity for it, but obviously he wasn't taking it that seriously. If he thinks he could just like defeat it, like like he understood it that quickly and just could defeat it, like that whole. And I think Zizek talks about this too, but basically the history of like actual philosophy post Marx, not just people who adopt like the social, like the critique of political economy, like as communists, but people who are actually philosophers, like academics and stuff like that. A lot of them was basically doing something similar in the sense of basically kind of like going against Hegel, and then kind of going in a circle where you think you're going against Hegel, but you end up basically coming to a conclusion to realize like, oh crap, Hegel was right. I just basically ended up back in the same spot that Hegel was at by trying to disprove it. And I think that's what Marx ended up doing as well. But he really never got a chance to really to come out and admit that. But I don't think he would have admitted it anyway. But I mean, he tried. He kind of did like pokes at it in ways. But the chief defect of all hitherto existing materialism that I fear back included, is that the thing, reality, sensuousness, is conceived only in the form of the object or of contemplation, but not as sensuous human activity practice, not subjectively. Hence, in contradistinction to materialism, the active side was developed abstractly by idealism, which of course does not know real sensuous activity as such, which kind of doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But okay, but like the point that he had against particular forms of materialism, and their ignoring of the human social relations that existed, which he ends up pulling from Hegel to critique the political economists. He pulls it from Hegel, like doing it, like his ability to like kind of explain it, his explanatory power, and the logic that he pulls from Hegel at a fundamental level of like kind of why the like liberal bourgeois political economists of the time period was kind of ignoring all the social relations, besides their own self-interest and not wanting to kind of degrade capitalism, which could potentially affect their like economies or whatever else, but or kind of upset like people who were capitalists or whatever, or their ideologies didn't want to go against their logical frameworks. I mean, like kind of like the logic behind it came from like him like understanding Hegel, but it's kind of crazy. So let me go on. This is the German ideology. And like I said, I don't even think I need to go through all this. I think I kind of made the main point that I wanted to try to make. Like some of this stuff probably didn't even need to be released, to be honest. Like to be totally honest, a lot of that stuff didn't even need to be released. Okay, but this is what I want to get to. This is where you can see after all of this, like kind of like them basically saying, "Hope." Well, again, like some of that stuff really just didn't need to be released. But okay, let me look at this letter real quick. This is very important. This is 1958. So let me go back to my timeline again. On the works. I'm gonna go ahead and click a couple of these off. We don't need this. We don't need this. I could probably click off a couple of those. Let me try to find the I need to find the Marx work. So I'm just going to go right here. Marx and Engels archive. And go to the work date subject index again. Okay. So if you're looking at this 50, what was it? 53, 8, 58. So 58, right? So this is right before the critique of contributions of political economy, including the preface, and right after the Grundrisse. So these are notes on political economy. He's basically going through political economy, trying to develop basically what ends up becoming capital, right? So the critique of political economy it includes like some of the first chapters, right? So these are the ones where if you read like the first like variations that he wrote of this, you'll see the Hegelian language. And when you get to not the footnote, but a comment later on about Hegel and stuff like that, you'll understand why that is. So right here he says, I'm pretty sure it's this paragraph because there's only one paragraph that was important in this. Yeah, right here. So I'm exceedingly glad to learn. Wait, is this gonna be big enough for people to see? Let me blow it up a little bit. Okay, here we go. So I am exceedingly glad to learn that your health is progressing well. For the past 3 weeks, I too have been dosing myself. Okay, this is 58, and he's already talking about the fact that his health is kind of deteriorating a little bit. So for the past 3 weeks, I too have been dosing myself and only stopped doing so today. I have been doing very much my nocturnal labors, accompanied, it is true, by mere lemonade on the one hand, but an immense deal of tobacco on the other. I am, by the way, discovering some nice arguments. I have completely demolished the theory of profit. Okay. So when he's talking about the theory of profit, I don't know what specifically he's talking about, but I'm going to assume that he means, like the notion of the way he describes it. Like, for example, like just say Apple. Say you buy an Apple for $5 and you sell it for $10 to someone else, and you make $5 basically profit. You spent your 5, then you recoup 10 back, so that's a plus 5, right? So what like that, like the surface level profit of exchange that's done by political economists to mask the social relations ignores like where the heck it came from. So where the heck did you just like, because that is just basically theft, right? So you bought an apple for $5. That's the value that you're going to attribute to of it, and that standpoint. So basically, what you did was just rip someone off and basically cheated. But that doesn't explain how economy works. It doesn't explain how economy works at all. That's just an exchange. But where's the production? Where's the distribution? How are you getting your other resources? You can't live off $10. What are you going to buy with that? Who are you going to buy it from? Et cetera, et cetera. So how does the production process work? And when you look at the actual production process and the social relations, then you start seeing like say the easiest way to explain it is to imagine slavery, because slavery is a production process. So imagine, I guess the easy way to put it would be, imagine if instead of paying the slaves, or instead of just giving the slaves barely enough to eat, barely enough to live, barely enough to eat to live, barely enough shelter and everything to live, barely enough clothes or whatever else to live, to reproduce, to be able to reproduce their ability to do labor, and produce whatever products for society, the entire society, or the master, or whoever else. Imagine if instead of that, you just paid them enough to buy it from someone else, and you generalize commodity production, and then that's capital. So basically, you pay a means of subsistence. So you pay enough so that you could reproduce and reproduce the labor power, and then you take that amount, and then the amount you produce over that, which you could then sell, becomes a surplus and surplus value once it's sold back as commodities. So that can then explain, how you're reproducing labor, explain the distribution, explain the profit, where the profit is coming from. And the profit in society comes from, like I said, if it's slavery, you don't have any money, say, but slaves produce the wealth, and they're producing physical wealth. And how they do that is by producing not just enough to sustain their own living, but to produce enough to sustain both the living of themselves and the overall society, or their master, or whomever else they need to produce more for. And that's what happens in capitalism. Enough is produced by lower class, the proletariat, or however you want to define it, I guess in an abstract sense, to produce for the whole society. And the difference between paying the means of subsistence versus the overall wealth in society as like kind of taken from the overall wealth assets that are produced by the lower class, the producing class. The difference between that, the surplus value, is the profit, and then that explains the access to the resources. So you have that difference, and you have this money, basically the difference between that and the money left in the economy, which then could be redistributed amongst the middle upper class, the bourgeoisie, in order to then purchase the products and distribute that wealth amongst themselves in terms of money to then buy the products. So that's what he's talking about here. Basically, I don't even know what the hell I explained the whole damn thing like that, but whatever. But whatever. So in case you didn't know what capital was about. So what was of great use to me as regards to the method of treatment. Wait, what? Okay, completely. I stopped here. I have completely demolished the theory of profit as hitherto propounded. He's talking about by the other political economists, what we consider the classical political economists at the time. So what was of great use to me as regards method of treatment was Hegel's logic, at which I had taken another look by mere accident. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Fraulegraf. I don't know if he's English or German. I guess that really Frau and Fraulegraf in German, but maybe Friedel or something in English or something. I don't know. But having found it made me a present of several volumes of Hegel. Originally the property of Bakunin. It has well, if ever the time comes when such work is again possible, I should very much like to write 2 or 3 sheets, making accessible to the common reader the rational aspect of the method which Hegel not only discovered but also mystified. I guess I don't know why they were so confused about Hegel's method or whatever, but I can understand why they would be confused, but they shouldn't have been confused by Hegel's method. But obviously Marx gets it, and he gets the fact that oh crap, there's something here. But I think what happened was the way Hegel is complicated, I guess, if you don't understand philosophy. So by some of the misinterpretations and interpretations that other people probably presented, or how he might have read it when he was young. Because when I read Hegel, I didn't read it in college, because I dropped out of college. I didn't really go. So I took a couple philosophy courses in college before I dropped out, but I wasn't majoring in philosophy. So I don't know what the hell they teach in schools, and I don't know what people read as undergraduates, or and I don't know what it would have been like back then. But I presume that you're probably getting stuff thrown at you that you probably don't have the capacity to understand. Like, I doubt they're going through the progression of reading this and that and this and that in order, and it matters what order you read it in, because you have to understand this, connect it to this, connect it to this, connect it to this, and build the ideas. And if you're not doing that, and you're not on a level of understanding and thinking for yourself to be able to just, comprehend all the ideas, you might not get it. And that could have been basically what happened, where he wasn't getting like where all the ideas was coming from. It reads it again and it puts like in a different context, and it starts like clicking. Like, oh crap, that's very powerful. That method, that logic is very powerful. And what then ended up happening? So he writes this letter. So let me go. I'm gonna skip over some of this stuff. Let me go to that to the note, because he explains it in the afterword here. This is the 1973 afterword to the second German edition. This is where the famous quote from Marx is at. I'm pretty sure. I'm hoping it's here, because if it's not, then I didn't freaking waste my time. Okay. Okay, there we go. So, okay, I got it. Okay, so whilst the writer pictures what he takes to be actually my method, in this striking and as far as concerns my own application of it, generous way, what else is he picturing but the dialectic method? Of course, the method of, okay, I don't like to say dialectic method in that sense. Yeah, I don't like to say dialectic method in that sense, but I guess you could consider it dialectic. But I consider the utilization of Hegel's logic, not a dialectical method, but okay. But of course, the method of presentation must differ in the form, informed from that of inquiry. The latter has to appropriate the material in detail, to analyze it in different forms of its development, to trace out the interconnections. Only after this work is done can the actual movement be adequately described. If this is done successfully, if the life of the subject matter is ideally reflected as in a mirror, then it may appear as if it had been done, as if we had before us a mere a priori construction. So my dialectic method is not only different from the Hegelian, but it's the direct opposite, like I said, which is crazy. To Hegel, the life process of the human brain, i.e. the process of thinking, which under the name of idea, he even transforms into an independent subject, is the Demiurgos of the real world. And the real world is only the external phenomenal form of the idea. With me, on the contrary, the ideal is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind. What? And translated into forms of thought. Jesus Christ, that is bad. Jeez. I mean, the first couple of times I think I read that before, but it's been a while to realize just how, like, just dumb that explanation is. But, oh my God, that's terrible. So, I mean, Marx doesn't necessarily have a dialectic method. There's no dialectic method that differs from Hegel's at all. There's no opposite of it. That what he's describing is not even a dialectic method at all. It's not a dialectic method. What he just described. What he's describing is just like the I guess philosophical worldview, basically. But he's trying to describe it through like the way that philosophy like the concept of what Hegel would call the concept or idea is arranged. So what, like he says, under the name of the idea. Okay. But that's not what he's talking about. So even he transforms into independent subject, phenomenal form of the idea. With me, on the contrary, the idea is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind. So that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense, because okay, this is the point. Okay, this is the point I want to make. In philosophy, you got to ask yourself why they did that. Why did they say the idea? Well, the point is, if you say, okay, Descartes did this differently, and the reason, but Hegel had a problem with that skepticism of Descartes, but Descartes basically went back and said, well, I know nothing. So let me just assume this, everything's out the window. How do I know that I know anything? And says, well, how do I know I exist? So he says, well, I think. So I'm just going back to like the basic. So I know I think because I'm doing it right now. I'm thinking out loud. I know I'm thinking. And given that I am thinking, whatever it is that is thinking is the word is being, has being, mean exists. So I am. I know I am as in I am as it relates to being, because that's what the word means. I am. I think, therefore I am. I am, therefore I exist. So I know I exist. So that's the starting point of thinking. So you know what is I, the idea of myself, I know that I exist. And well, I guess that'd be a little bit different. Cause okay. Uh if you read Spinoza, you know that Descartes wasn't making this mistake, but people presume that there was a mistake being made here with like a mind-body problem, but there's not, because by the ideal of Hegel, you know that means everything, like the infinite. Okay, so like God is an easier way to put it, and because I guess Spinoza would put it, that God, but there's two parts that human beings could conceive of God, because God's infinite, and that's thought and extension. And they say, oh well, that solved the mind body problem or something, but there was no mind body problem to solve. He knew what he was talking about. So Descartes did. So yeah, but yeah, that's the point, right? So the point of doing that is that you're starting without making logical errors, because if someone then is starting with the material and ask, well, how do you know the world exists? They could ask you that. Well, how do you know the world exists? Like Descartes runs into a different problem that he answers his own way. Like, well, how do you know that like whatever it is that you're experiencing isn't like, a dream, or whatever you see isn't like, isn't like you're not being fooled. And then he gets into like vivid and clear. I guess vivid and clear was one interpretation. I think he used clear and distinct ideas, vivid and clear ideas, and that's where the term idea comes from. If you didn't really know where the ideal or idealism idea came from, it came from that clear and distinct ideas from Descartes. So that was the point though, right? Because then you can't then ask, well, how do you know that the material exists like independently, basically? Because you're saying it exists. So how do you know it exists? That if the material is what is what has being, is what is. How do you know that? Well, you say that, well, I know that because what his explanation would have to be based on this statement would be reflected by the human mind. Well, if it's reflected by the human mind, it doesn't exist, because you're in order to explain its existence, you're bringing in some external object to explain its existence, or some other object to explain its existence. So you're saying it's not ideal, which means it doesn't come from the idea, it doesn't come from the thing that exists, that exists, but it comes from something else. Well, if it comes from that something else, it can't come from that something else, because because you're saying it comes from a human mind, which then you have to prove the existence of. And if you prove the existence of the human mind, you have to be an idealist, because you'd have to say, well, I am, therefore I exist. And it says to translate it in forms of thought. So that's a philosophical error. That's a fundamental philosophical error that he's making, because he doesn't understand basic philosophy. And that's that lack of understanding basic philosophy. And the extent, like, if you don't understand that, like, there's so much that comes along with basic philosophy. Like, that's just basic, like, skeptical based metaphysics, or first philosophy. And I want to call it metaphysics because a misnomer or whatever. But first philosophy, and or ontology, maybe being, or whatever. I don't care what you call it. Whatever you want to call it, that's what that is. That's fundamental. But there's also moral philosophy, fundamental ideas of moral philosophy. You can go through the list of things that there is, but there is your issue. There's your issue with the problem, is that he explains something in such a way that is philosophically already incoherent. The ideal is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind and translated into forms of thought. The ideal is nothing else than the material world. How's it the material world because you're trying to prove the existence of it. You have to start with something you can prove the existence of. You can't start with making assumptions. You can't assume anything if you're using a skeptical method. But see, Hegel doesn't like that. Hegel wants to start with, what do I know that I know? And then let's go backwards from that, because I know that I know it. So if because he doesn't like the skepticism part of it, so because it's kind of stupid. I guess in general, like, human beings already know. Like, I mean, you take anybody, don't have to study philosophy. If you put like a piece, like a cup of water on a table, like you'd be like, what's that on a table? Like a cup of water or whatever. When I go examine it, maybe they could say it's a cup. They don't know what's in the cup. It's just a cup. So everybody knows what a cup is. Everybody knows what a table is. Everybody knows what one is. By the time you're an adult and you speak English. So there's a cup on the table. You go ask a normal adult, what is that? What is that? Where? What is that on the table? Or it's a cup. It's a what? It's a cup. Where? On the table. That that? Yeah. Yeah. Why? Well, because it's right there. It's a cup on the damn table. Why the fuck you asking me stupid ass questions? Like, what the fuck? Like, what were you asking me, bro? There's a cup on the motherfucking table, bro. You just asked what the hell was on the table. It's a cup. Like, and then you get like the 21st century, like, deconstruction nonsense, where you get the whole, oh well, within a certain, assumptions of metaphysical and ontological assumptions of arrangements and language, and you with under certain definitions of codes of whatever values exist within this current ideological framework of this being called and understood by other people as a cup, and this being understood whatever within this certain context as a table. I could risk the hypothesis that this is in fact a cup. It's like, no, it's a cup on a fucking table, bro. What the fuck are you fucking around? Like, what are you trying to be like? Let's go back to global skepticism. Let's assume I don't exist. Well, I know I exist. What the hell am I going to go back and assume and say I am, therefore I exist, and I think, and all this other stupid shit? You already know this stuff. So let's start there. There's a cup on the table. How do you know there's a cup on the table? So that's what you start with, right? You start with that, like what is you, what is like the fundamental thing, and you go back from there, and then you say, well, this is the world as how I interpret it, and everybody interprets the world through their own lens, through the idea, through themselves, that through their own experiences. So through their own innate categories, whatever Kant might say, like certain innate inherent categories that human beings use to differentiate. So Hegel then goes back and says, let's strip this away. Now we're at undifferentiated being, or whatever. So you're just yourself viewing objects without differentiating them. But then you add in essence, and you add in you add in being first, and you add to being shapes, colors, whatever, like lengths, quantization of particular, and then you add in the essence, the basically what Lacan might say, like you add in the imaginary realm, and then you add in the symbolic realm, and you combine the symbolic and imaginary realms into a reality. And obviously, if you strip all that away to like undifferentiated, you just have like the real, but nothing's out of place in the real, right? So that is that, right? But Marx is just coming along, like just like kind of like without like even thinking what the hell he's doing. But you understand what he's doing here. You understand what he's trying to do, but it's a error, a huge error. So, okay, so that's him making a philosophical error. That's really not an error. You see what he wants to do here. One, he wants to take credit for the materialism. He wants to take credit for like a method which is just Hegel's. So he wants to make it his method. He wants to accept it as his method. So he says, well, I'm doing something differently. He's not doing anything differently. He's just labeling it and viewing it from the opposite way. Because Hegel can't be switched around, like Hegel said in this original in the original thing. If I go back, I want to scroll back to where it was. What did Hegel say about realist philosophy and idealism that I just read when I first started the video, when I first started recording. I hope I had the right page. So Mark II, idealism. Okay. So what did Hegel say about this? Consequently, the opposition of idealistic and realistic philosophy has no significance. So if it has no significance, Marx, you should have read that part, bro. You should have read that, and then you wouldn't have been talking crazy stuff about flipping Hegel on his head. Okay, there's no direct opposite here, bro. It has no significance. So what you just did was basically describe the exact same thing that Hegel was describing, but pretending to describe it as something different. Okay, philosophically, you're not describing anything different because once you go back to the philosophical roots and say what you have to start with, like you just said basically the same thing the other way and pretended you said something different. It's like me saying there's a cup on top of the table and then someone coming along and say, "Oh, hold up, bro. Hold up, bro. There's a table underneath the cup." Like I'm the direct opposite of a cup on top of the table. I'm a table underneath of the cup. That's what Marx is basically doing here. It's absolutely crazy. And the mystifying side of Hegelian dialectic, which I don't like to use the term Hegelian dialectic. He's talking about the logic is science of logic is philosophy. But I criticized nearly 30 years ago. Like I said, that's how long ago it was between him writing this stuff. It wasn't total 30 years because it's obviously the Capital came out before he did this remark. So this is a later version. This is 73, and I think this came out. Capital came out in 60 something. So let me see if I can find it here. Thought, influence. Come on, where's this bibliography? There we go. Capital was 67. Yes. So this is a few years after that. So nearly 30 years. Enough time to know better, right? So the mystifying side of Hegel, criticizing it 30 years ago at a time when it was still the fashion. But just as I was working at the first volume of Das Kapital, this is what I just explained earlier. As though I therefore openly avowed myself as a pupil of that mighty thinker. And this is where you can see he's kind of giving Hegel credit here now. So he kind of realizes like that, hey, what I did earlier in my life of just bashing him kind of like crazy. Well, he wasn't even bashing him, he was bashing like other thinkers mostly. But or basically his like interpretation through them, the interpretation of Hegel through them basically. I therefore openly avow myself as a pupil of that mighty thinker, and even here and there in the chapter of the theory of value, use the terms. That's what I was saying. Use the expressions peculiar to him. That's what I was explaining earlier. And the mystification which dialectic suffered in Hegel's hands by no means prevents him from being the first to present its general form of working in a comprehensive and conscious manner. With him, it is standing on its head. It must be turned right side up again if you would discover the rational kernel within the mystical shell, which is crazy talk. I don't know what he's just saying that to basically be pretentious and like as if he like and just misunderstand what. And there is no one ahead. It's around. It's a circle. It's like you flip around a circle and you still have a circle. Like you could if he would have just been honest and said, I'm just changing it to a materialist perspective. Like I'm using an analysis of the material world, which is when he did. Like I'm using an analysis of political economy instead of using it just purely for to develop it philosophically. Which obviously that's what a method is, right? That's like if someone developed a scientific method and someone uses scientific method and to like make a discovery in science, and then started bashing a person who created the scientific method, and then try to kind of like take credit, like I'm flipping the scientific method like around. So like they were just doing this other stuff. I talk about methods, but I'm actually but when I apply the method, I'm doing something completely different. Like no, that's what the method was for. That's why he established it in the first place, was to do science of logic. So I'm giving you the logical, the framework which humans think in the most like comprehensive way for you to then apply and understand the way we understand ideas to the point where you could then apply this to the material world and develop your own ideas in the best way possible to get the correct answers about the physical world. And that's what Marx did. But then he decided to say, it's mystified. Come on, bro. Like, come on. And this, like I said, this created a huge problem, especially given that he never got to the point where he could basically just come out and admit and say, "Oh crap, that was kind of wrong. I shouldn't have done that," or whatever else. That this ended up being like towards the end of Marx's life, and he kind of just didn't want to get rid of like the ideology that he was stuck with from the beginning, which is the materialist. Which, I guess, like I said, is fine. but it has to be understood as basically being the same thing as idealists, but he tries to kind of make it seem as if it's something that's different. Like if you just call yourself a materialist, but you're really idealist, kind of like maybe like Zizek does sometimes, like a dialectical materialist or whatever, but he's really like an idealist philosopher. It's kind of like, okay, but what Marx did here is insane, okay, and it caused significant problems as you see as time went on. In its mystified form, dialectic became the fashion in Germany because it seems to transfigure and to glory the existing state of things, which I think that was kind of like a rumor, whatever, around like this, maybe the philosophy of right or something about how it kind of like glorified the German state or whatever. But that wasn't really the point of that either. I mean, maybe some of Hegel you could argue was a little bit more esoteric as to mask the fact that it was really like kind of materialistic and atheistic in the sense like that he didn't want to like because okay, viewing it from the perspective of the fact that they all were atheists and got kicked out of Germany, like the whole like generation of them basically got kind of like was like basically enemies of the state because of how they framed their kind of religious thinking and everything else. Bruno Bauer, Edgar Bauer, Marx, Steiner, or I guess what is the other guy? So all like that kind of whole generation kind of ended up being, you know, kind of problematic with regard to the state. So obviously Hegel was at the top of German philosophy at Berlin. So it's kind of like, yeah, again, you can go back to Descartes, like certain amount of their philosophy being based on the ontological argument for the existence of God was just true, like philosophy from a philosophical perspective, making the proper assumptions to start from the beginning and develop a whole like theoretical framework of first philosophy that wasn't making any assumptions and that everything was logically connected, but in such a way also that wouldn't upset people, and it still did upset people. People still called Descartes and Spinoza atheists. Spinoza still had huge problems, got kicked out. I think his book was banned as well at the time. So yeah, they still had huge problems even with their kind of like approach and the existence of God and all this other stuff, because of how, like, you know, it maybe didn't leave any room for miracles and didn't leave any room for life after death and punishment and stuff like that, which you'll see it ends up being an issue with Leibniz, and like that ends up being like the kind of the point of Leibniz's work, and then Wolff, and then like Hume, and then Kant's reaction to Hume, basically by saying he was dogmatic because he followed that German philosophy, and then Hegel ends up responding back to Kant, basically, and bringing it back to where Spinoza was, after it kind of went off for a while, because they kind of started trying to allow for those other aspects that didn't really need to be there, because they're just assumptions. You can't start with an assumption in order to get to the result. You just have to go with what is. And like you can't start with, oh well, we want to get a philosophy that's going to guarantee a potential for heaven and hell and existence in the afterlife and punishment, divine punishment in the afterlife. And if we can't get that in our philosophy, because you know, there's no room for these other, like, you know, mystical or, you know, like religious elements, then we have a problem. But it's not a problem. And I think that that's where Hegel and a lot of them kind of had these elements in there to not go against the state and be considered, like, you know, enemies because of their atheism and stuff like that. And I think that's pretty much what it was. And it's such as that he don't want to seem like enemy of the state, like he opposes, like he's on a kind of like a radical like Republican or Democratic Republican, and he wants to overthrow the monarchy and stuff like that. So he just developed a philosophy such that it seemed as if it was in support of the state, or saw the German state at the time as the most like rational form, right? Okay. In its rational form, it is a scandal and abomination to bourgeoisdom and its doctrinaire professors, because it includes in its comprehensive and affirmative recognition the existing state of things, at the same time also the recognition of the negation of that state of its inevitable breakup, because it regards even every historical development of social form as in fluid movement, therefore takes into account the transient nature, not less than its move to existence, because it lets nothing imposed upon it and is essential, critical, and revolutionary. So, okay, that says it is rational form, but it was already that. It was already this. So, yeah, like it was already that. Like Hegel already has the elements of critique of I guess what you would consider bourgeois philosophy, but like first philosophy, like the stuff that it was like kind of, if you look at like Hume or like Locke or somebody, he already had like kind of like eviscerated their style of philosophy, like the empiricist realist style. And Marx kind of thought he could take that like the shell out. He could take the idealism and get to materialism and not come back with the realism. But that's exactly what he did when he makes this assumption of the the realist assumption of there being a material world that exists and is reflected by the human mind. When in reality, there's just a world. There's just the world that exists, and there's differentiation that's done by the human mind to differentiate. For example, you have to differentiate yourself from the world. That's a differentiation. Like, what gives you the authority philosophically to say, I'm me and this is the world? Well, that's the ideal. The ideal conception that exists of a me and of the world. That's the thought and extension of God. They're parts of God, if you go back and read Spinoza. So, yeah. Okay, so that's pretty much it. But I will go through a couple of these other like kind of sources and make fun of stuff or shit. I guess I could cuss. It doesn't really matter, I guess. But I'm just gonna go, I guess, make fun of the stuff. Oh wait, oh yeah, I forgot about this part. This is the footnote. I think it's the fourth footnote. Yeah. Okay, this is where he explains, because you could see where more I'm not gonna read this. If you want to read it, like watch on the screen, you can. But the weak points in abstract materialism. So you can see what Marx was actually with the historical materialism is a materialism that excludes history and its process, are at once evident from the abstract ideological conceptions of a spokesperson whenever they venture beyond the bounds of their own specificity. But what a more powerful, you can see where he's coming from of the basically the content or the formal nature of abstract materialism not being dialectical, not being historical from the standpoint of ignoring the context, ignoring the social relations, etc., etc. But that's all in Hegel. That is all in Hegel at a more fundamental, like philosophical level. That's all in Hegel, and so like the point basically, and also this isn't you can't make this claim against Hegel. That he's what is he ignoring? He's ignoring history, his process. No, he's not ignoring any of that. So it's yeah. So you can see where his attack is not really necessarily against Hegel. It's against, and as you can see, as it's made in Capital, it's made against the like the English empiricist realist tradition and English philosophy, which leads to the bourgeois traditions in English political economy. English speaking, I guess you'd say, some Scottish, or whatever else. It doesn't matter. This is English speaking political economy of the United States, of Great Britain, and that kind of morphed into like the sort of the difference between continental and analytic philosophy today. But I mean, if you go back, like I already mentioned this before, the process of them viewing the thing from like a one-sided nature of just the exchange process to interpret profit as basically like say paying someone $5, or like I use the Apple analogy because that's like even a more basic one-sided like analogy or metaphor or whatever. But if you looked at even like paying the workers for their labor versus paying the worker labor power to ignore the social relations, or you look at like commodity fetishism and all the other things that Marx developed, or the worship of money and stuff like that. as like kind of like the god of like sort of like the god, the fetishism, like it has powers that doesn't actually exist within it, right? It has like these fetishistic powers in existence, um, and they attribute to it, in order to ignore the social relations. That's all, in Hegel. So, and it all comes from Hegel's logic and method. Well, not method, but his logic. And that's what Marx applies to then be able to kind of get that like seriousness of a fundamental critique of capitalist ideology. And his critique is of capitalist ideology as much as it is of an explanation of how capitalism actually functions materially. So that's important to point out as well. So I have this timeline, and this is what I meant. Marx basically graduates, as you can see. His PhD was in 41. The manifesto. What am I doing? There we go. So here's the manifesto. Where's the manifesto? Right down here, 48. So he obviously graduates. They spend a decent amount of time like attacking after he graduates the Hegel, like the Hegelian philosophy. So you can see there's a doctoral thesis, Engels against Schelling, the critique of philosophy of right. This is all when he's younger. The Jewish question that was against Bruno Bauer. The Holy Family might have been against the Bauer brothers, maybe. Was that was against? Yeah, Bruno Bauer and Company, Edgar Bauer, I think is his brother's name. Feuerbach, thesis on Feuerbach, the German ideology. And some of these aren't even things that was actually even released. Some of these were just like kind of like manuscripts and notes that the Soviet Union and stuff like that ended up pushing later on. But as you can see, like he's just fresh out of. I guess you can compare it to Du Bois if you know Du Bois, because he. But I think Du Bois was a lot more sharp. Like, because I don't think you could consider. Du Bois, I think, was a lot better than Marx. I think he was a lot more intelligent. A lot. His analysis was a lot sharper, because Souls of Black Folks, I think, stands up. Like even in comparison to like the Communist Manifesto. And then if you look at something like Black Reconstruction, I mean, that's pretty good theory in there. Pretty good analysis for someone who's just kind of like jumps into like political economy at that stage and reads Marx and basically applies it to the Civil War and Reconstruction in that kind of way. Like it's kind of genius, but that's just my opinion, I guess. But well, I guess whose else's opinion would it be? But okay, but you see this attacks against what is essentially not Hegel, but Hegelian thinkers that are pretty much all materialists in the sense that most of them were atheists. Bruno Bauer that's the Jewish question wasn't against Jewish people, it was against religion basically. It was sort of an anti-religious thing, more than anything else. And he wrote against Christianity, obviously. I think he wrote the thing on Christ and the Caesar type work. And then the Poverty of Philosophy, that was I think Proudhon or somebody. So he has basically spent a little bit of time like attacking different like ideological frameworks of people like within German, French, or I guess Proudhon was French maybe, but mostly German society. And then obviously they come up with the manifesto, and then Marx starts working on Capital, at least a little bit after this. Here's the Grundrisse. So yeah, he starts taking notes and stuff on Capital, and then during this period of time, he looks at Hegel again, and at that point in time, I think he realizes like, oh, there's a little bit more here, and then eventually he obviously comes out later in the and explains like tries to defend Hegel, but never really fully admits. He just kind of sticks with the notion that like the materialism and stuff made sense. Even though if you read the first thing at Capital, and he admits to this, like it's like basically Hegel's like footprint all over it. Even he even chooses to use the style of language in the earlier versions of it, and But then obviously he's sick at this point. That's why I said you gotta go back to his health, because you got to understand like the context of what happened. I mean, his health was deteriorating. A lot of people really don't really think of that as much. But if you read his biography, if you read like people was like, I mean, he had like, I think a skin condition. They said a liver condition here, but like excruciating pain. Sometimes they said, like his health was just terrible, towards the end of his life, especially. And Engels took over from him a lot, took care of him and stuff. Took over for a lot. Obviously, volume 2, I want to say volume 2 and 3, Engels ended up having to finish after Marx passed away. Marx obviously didn't get to finish as many volumes probably as he would have wanted for how complicated capitalism is. I mean, he could have written like, countless volumes. Or not, I mean, obviously a reasonable amount. He could have definitely hit a couple more off. He probably could have even changed the ones. Maybe they wouldn't even look like how they looked. Or he could have changed the subject of what he felt was more important for those ones. But like obviously during this time, I guess it would have been like the 70s, 80s, after the release of the first one, his health starts deteriorating a lot more and he ends up passing away. And then that's when you'll see Engels come out with a lot more of the stuff on like the materialism and stuff like that. So if we scroll down, 77 is the anti during 78 on dialectics again, but you can't get that. Well, I mean you can get it, but you just have to, if you Google it, it'll probably pop up. And then you have an 1880, and see the E represents the Engels is the one coming out with it. So utopian and scientific socialism. Then you have the dialectics of nature. See, this is Engels writing this stuff. And then after this time, Marx passed away. Yeah, Engels came out with and he little bit of figure back in the classical German philosophy. This is 86. This is Engels again. Okay, sorry about that again. I had to go check something again. But anyway, my point there was Engels basically starts carrying the weight of the whole framing of like the materialism versus idealism stuff. Later on, why I really couldn't say, but he does. And I can't say for sure. I can't say here and say that I could like read minds. I know exactly what Marx was thinking, or that if Marx didn't pass away, that things would have been different, or if the Soviet Union didn't like come, because I'm pretty sure even the like things we consider like to be like core readings on this, like I'm not even sure if they even came out with like the German ideology, for example. Like this is Marx and Engels. The thesis on Feuerbach is like a small little thing. The German ideology is a longer thing, but I think most of it was written by Engels, or some of it at least. Some of it at least was written by Engels. But let me go look real quick, because I'm pretty sure, because this is like a major one, like obviously the German ideology, but most of these was Marx and Engels. And some of this type of stuff that was less politically economic based was let me say the German ideology is a set of manuscripts written by Marx and Engels. And they did not find a publisher. Okay. And it says later retrieved and published for the first time in 1932. Okay. It says the first part of the book is an exposition of Marx's materialist conception of history. The recent research indicates that much of the system in this part was created afterwards by Marx and Engels Institute in 1930 from the set of manuscripts written by Marx. Okay, much of the rest of the book consists of satirical polemics against Bruno Bauer, or the Hegelians and Mark Steiner. Okay. So, that pretty much explains, I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, it's Wikipedia, but okay. that would explain that. But let me go. I hope that point was clear though. Basically, a lot of the stuff was carried by angles, and a lot of it didn't make any sense like whatsoever if you go back to what Hegel actually thought. Um, I don't know if I have to address all the stuff that kind of goes against Hegel in this video, but I guess the important thing to point out the fact that he's even talking about Hegel in this angles. This is an important thing to keep in mind because Engels, right, is not a philosopher. He's not a philosopher. I guess I won't say by any stretch of the imagination, but he obviously wasn't the core theorist. The core theorist was Marx, and he was a political economic theorist. But he did have a PhD in philosophy, right? He had a PhD in philosophy. Engels did not have a PhD in philosophy. Engels withdrew from gymnasium and had no degree from Berlin. So the fact that he's trying to contribute philosophical grounds for Marxism against Hegel, when Hegel, I mean, to say Hegel was a philosopher is kind of an understatement. I mean, if you go look at something, I mean, look at the science of logic and how complicated philosophy that is. But if you look at something like his history of philosophy, I think that's the one here. History of philosophy. Okay. Maybe it should be on here. Their contents. So if you look at something like his history of philosophy, this is his lectures. So I haven't read all these. I just read parts, relevant parts. But these are like lecture series. I mean, it must have been taken from his like lecture notes or something like that. But he's lecturing on the entire history of philosophy. Like he's going through like the entire history. Part 1, Greek philosophy. He's going through like every Greek philosopher and explaining like the progression of ideas, all the way through Socrates and the whole like going down a whole list. Plato, Aristotle, and he goes all the way, all the way up through like the present day basically. When these lectures, or I guess what it would have been present day at that time. What I mean. And it's like his understanding of philosophy and all the different aspects and all the different thinkers throughout history was like, it was top level. And that's why sometimes it seems like, people have trouble reading it. And really the issue is not so much that it's difficult to read, it's just that he presumes that you have, I'm not going to say a similar level of knowledge, but he assumes you have at least some comprehension of the complex ideas in philosophy as they relate to various thinkers and the issues with them, or the like philosophy as it is correct. He assumes that you have some knowledge of that. Like he assumes like you probably know Spinoza like significantly well, and you know the Cartesian philosophy and the assumptions being made, and or not the assumptions being made, but I guess like the connection between like the logical points of the philosophy that connects everything together, and you kind of understand like how like the thoughts are working and going from one thought to the next thought in a logical way. So, but I mean, for Engels to be trying to even write on this type of stuff is absolutely crazy, and for someone to take it as authority is absolutely like insane. Like it's insanity. Like it would be like, if like I started writing like critiques of like Einstein's theory of relativity or something with no like dropped out of like college, like I didn't like physics class, and now I'm trying to like explain like why Einstein shouldn't be accepted in this specific way and why we should just accept this other thing that someone else from like a contemporary of mine or something. Like this is absolutely crazy. But I don't know. It happened. It happened. and it just like it totally deteriorated in terms of the ideas.